The gunshot that shattered the morning air was meant for Thea Crawford, but the stranger in the dust-covered coat knocked her sideways before the bullet could find its mark. She hit the wooden planks of the boardwalk hard, the wind rushing from her lungs as the weight of a solid body covered hers. Another shot rang out, splintering the post just inches from where her head had been moments before. The stranger rolled with her, tucking them both behind a water trough as chaos erupted in the street of Victor, Colorado. It was early September in 1882, and Thea had been walking to the general store with nothing more dangerous on her mind than whether they had the fabric she needed for her new curtains. Now someone was trying to kill her, and she had no idea why. "Stay down," the man said, his voice rough as gravel but steady as stone. He drew his revolver with practiced ease, his eyes scanning the rooftops across the dusty street. Thea's heart hammered against her ribs. She could smell gunpowder and leather and something else, something like sage and open sky. The stranger's hat had fallen off in the scramble, revealing dark hair that needed cutting and a face that looked like it had been carved from the same granite as the mountains surrounding their mining town. He fired once, twice, and she heard a yelp of pain followed by the sound of someone scrambling away across the tin roof of the saloon. "Who are you?" she managed to gasp out, her hands shaking as she pressed them against the rough wood of the trough. "Zane Stockton," he said, not taking his eyes off the roofline. "And you just made someone real angry, miss." "I have not done anything," Thea protested, her voice rising with indignation despite the fear coursing through her veins. "I was just walking to buy thread." Zane finally looked at her then, and his eyes were the color of whiskey and firelight, amber and gold with flecks of green. There was something in them that made her breath catch, something that had nothing to do with the danger they were currently in. "Well, somebody thinks different. That was professional shooting up there. Whoever wants you dead paid good money for it." The street was filling with people now, miners and shop owners spilling out to see what the commotion was about. Zane holstered his gun and stood, offering Thea his hand. She hesitated only a moment before taking it, and the warmth of his calloused palm against hers sent an unexpected jolt through her system. He pulled her to her feet with an ease that suggested considerable strength hidden beneath that worn coat. "You are bleeding," Thea said, noticing the graze along his shoulder where the second bullet had come too close. Zane glanced down at it as if it were nothing more than a mosquito bite. "I have had worse." "Come on, we need to get you somewhere safe while I figure out who is trying to turn you into a memory." "I can take care of myself," Thea said automatically, though her voice shook enough to undermine the words. It was what she always said, what she had been saying for the past 3 years since her father died and left her alone in this rough mining town. She had learned to be hard, to keep people at arm's length, because every man who had ever promised to help her had wanted something in return, and none of them had kept their word once they got it. Zane's mouth quirked in something that was not quite a smile. "I am sure you can. But right now, someone with a rifle thinks you are target practice, and I would prefer not to scrape you off the street after I went to the trouble of saving you." He started walking, keeping himself between her and the rooftops, and after a moment's hesitation, Thea followed. What choice did she have? She knew the face of every man in Victor who might shoot at her, and she could not think of a single one with reason to want her dead. Her father's gold claim had played out years ago. She made her living sewing and taking in laundry, barely scraping by. She had no money, no property, nothing worth killing for. Zane led her down the street to the sheriff's office, his hand resting casually on his gun the whole way. Sheriff Morrison looked up from his desk, his bushy white eyebrows rising when he saw them. Zane Stockton, Morrison said, his voice neutral in a way that suggested history. Heard you were back in town. Someone just tried to kill Miss Crawford here, Zane said without preamble. Shooter was on the roof of the Silver Dollar, professional work. Morrison's expression shifted from wary to concerned. He looked at Thea, and she saw something like pity in his eyes, which made her straighten her spine. She did not need pity. She had survived this long without it. Miss Crawford, do you have any idea who might want to hurt you? The sheriff asked, pulling out a battered notebook. None, Thea said firmly. I mind my own business. I sew, I do laundry, I go to church on Sundays. I have no enemies that I know of. What about your father's claim? Morrison pressed. Any disputes there? Thea shook her head. It has been exhausted for years. There is nothing left but worthless rock. Zane was watching her with those unsettling eyes, and she felt heat rise to her cheeks. She was not used to being looked at like that, like she was a puzzle worth solving. Most men in Victor looked at her with either lust or dismissal, sometimes both. But Zane looked at her like she mattered, and it made something in her chest feel too tight. I will ask around, Morrison said, but his tone suggested he did not expect to find much. Meanwhile, Miss Crawford, you should stay somewhere safe. Do you have family, friends who could take you in? I have my boarding house, Thea said stiffly. I will be fine there. No, you will not, Zane said bluntly. Boarding house has more holes than a screen door. Anyone could get in. You need somewhere secure. And I suppose you have a suggestion, Thea said, her voice sharp with the defensiveness she had learned to wear like armor. My place, Zane said. I have a cabin up near the tree line. Solid walls, one door, windows you can watch. You will be safe there. Thea laughed, though there was no humor in it. I am not going to some stranger's cabin in the woods. Do you think I am simple? Something flickered across Zane's face, something that might have been hurt if it had lasted longer than a heartbeat. I think you are alive because I knocked you out of the way of a bullet. I think someone wants you dead, and you do not have a lot of options. But if you would rather take your chances at the boarding house, that is your choice. He turned to leave, and Thea felt something twist in her stomach. She was being ungrateful, and she knew it, but 3 years of broken promises had taught her not to trust easily. Every man who had offered to help after her father died had wanted something. Mr. Peterson at the bank had wanted her land. Tom Wheeler at the saloon had wanted considerably more than that. Even Reverend Harris had wanted her to marry his nephew, a boy of 19 with wandering hands and a mean streak. Nobody kept promises, not in her experience, but Zane had thrown himself in front of a bullet for her. That had to count for something. Wait, she said, the word coming out softer than she intended. Zane paused at the door but did not turn around. I am sorry. That was rude. You saved my life and I am grateful, but you have to understand I do not know you. For all I know, you could be working with whoever shot at me. Now Zane did turn, and there was something fierce in his eyes. If I wanted you dead, miss, you would be dead. I would not waste time with this conversation, but believe what you want. I will be at the Lucky Strike if you change your mind. He left, and the silence he left behind felt heavier than it should have. Morrison cleared his throat. For what it is worth, Miss Crawford, Zane Stockton is a hard man but an honest one. He used to scout for the army, tracked renegades through country that would kill most men. He does not make promises he cannot keep. Everyone says that, Thea said quietly, until they break them. She spent the rest of the day at the sheriff's office, giving her statement and trying to think of anyone who might want her dead. By the time the sun started to sink behind the mountains, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold, she was exhausted and no closer to answers. Morrison walked her back to the boarding house himself, his hand on his gun the whole way. The boarding house was exactly as run down as Zane had suggested. The owner, Mrs. Kelly, was a kind woman but too old and too tired to maintain the place properly. Thea's room was on the second floor, accessed by an outside staircase that creaked with every step. The door had a lock, but it was flimsy. The window looked out over the alley, and someone with a ladder could reach it easily. Thea sat on her narrow bed and tried not to think about bullets and strangers with amber eyes. She had survived 3 years on her own. She could survive this too. But as darkness fell and every sound in the alley made her jump, she began to wonder if stubbornness was the same thing as stupidity. She did not sleep that night. She sat in the chair by the window, her father's old pistol in her lap, watching the shadows. Every time her eyes started to drift closed, she jerked awake with her heart racing. By the time the sun rose, she felt hollow and shaky, and she knew she could not do this again. The Lucky Strike saloon did not open until noon, so Thea waited in the dining room of the boarding house, drinking bitter coffee and pretending to eat the eggs Mrs. Kelly had made for her. When the clock finally chimed 12, she put on her bonnet, checked that her pistol was loaded, and walked down the street with her head high. The saloon was dim and smelled of stale beer and tobacco. A few miners sat at the tables, nursing drinks and playing cards. The bartender, a man with a scar across his cheek and kind eyes, looked up when she entered. "Help you, miss?" he asked, his tone respectful. Women did not usually come into saloons, especially not respectable ones. "I am looking for Zane Stockton," Thea said, keeping her voice steady. "Upstairs, second door on the right. He rents the room." The bartender paused. "You are the woman he saved yesterday. Miss Crawford, right?" Thea nodded, uncomfortably aware that her near-death experience was apparently the talk of the town. She climbed the narrow stairs at the back of the saloon, her hand trailing along the rough wooden banister. The hallway upstairs was cleaner than she expected, sunlight streaming through a window at the far end. She found the second door and knocked before she could change her mind. Zane opened it after a moment, and she could see surprise flicker across his face. He was in his shirt sleeves, the white cotton rolled up to reveal forearms corded with muscle and marked with old scars. His hair was damp, as if he had just washed, and Thea found herself noticing details she had no business noticing, like the way his collar was unbuttoned or the strong line of his jaw. "Miss Crawford," he said, his voice carefully neutral, "did not expect to see you here." "I did not sleep last night," Thea admitted. "And I realized that pride is not worth dying for. If your offer still stands, I would like to accept, just until the sheriff figures out who is trying to kill me." Zane studied her for a long moment, and Thea had the uncomfortable feeling that he could see right through her, past the careful walls she had built and into all the scared, lonely places she tried to hide. But when he spoke, his voice was gentle. "Offer stands. Give me 10 minutes to gather my things and we will head out. My cabin is about an hour's ride. Do you have a horse?" Thea shook her head. "I sold her last winter, needed the money for rent." "You can ride with me then," Zane said. He stepped back into his room, leaving the door open as he moved around, packing his saddlebags with efficient movements. Thea stayed in the hallway, watching him and trying to quiet the voice in her head that said this was a mistake, that she was being foolish, that she should not trust him. But she was so tired of being alone, so tired of being afraid, and something about Zane Stockton made her want to believe that maybe, just maybe, not everyone broke their promises. They left town 20 minutes later, Zane on his big bay gelding and Thea seated behind him, her arms wrapped awkwardly around his waist. She had ridden double before, but never with a man who was essentially a stranger. She could feel the heat of him through his shirt, the solid strength of his back against her cheek when the horse climbed the steep trail. He smelled like soap and leather, and something indefinable that made her feel oddly safe. The cabin appeared after about an hour of riding, tucked into a clearing surrounded by pines and aspens. It was small but well built, with solid log walls and a stone chimney. A creek ran nearby, the water clear and cold from the snowmelt still coming off the high peaks. Thea could see why Zane had chosen this place. It was defensible, with good sightlines and only one approach. Zane helped her down from the horse, his hands strong on her waist, and for a moment they stood there, closer than was proper. Thea could see gold flecks in his eyes and smell the scent of sage that seemed to cling to him. Her heart did something complicated in her chest, and she stepped back quickly, flustered in a way she had not been in years. "Let me show you around," Zane said, his voice slightly rougher than before. He led her inside, and Thea was surprised by how clean and organized everything was. There was a main room with a fireplace, a table and 2 chairs. A narrow bed was pushed against one wall, covered with what looked like a Navajo blanket. Shelves held supplies, neatly arranged. A rifle rack was mounted by the door. "It is not much," Zane said, "but it is dry and secure. You can have the bed. I will sleep on the floor." "I cannot take your bed," Thea protested automatically. "You can and you will," Zane said firmly. "I have slept on worse. Besides, I am the one who invited you here." There was something in his tone that suggested arguing would be pointless, so Thea nodded. She set her small bag down on the chair and looked around, feeling awkward. She was alone in a cabin in the woods with a man she barely knew. It should have felt dangerous. Instead, it felt like the first time in 3 years that she could actually breathe. "Thank you," she said quietly. "For this, for yesterday, for everything." Zane looked at her, and something in his expression made her throat feel tight. "You do not need to thank me for doing what is right, Miss Crawford." "Thea," she said impulsively. "You can call me Thea. If I am going to be staying in your home, we might as well use first names." "Thea," Zane repeated, and the way he said it, careful and warm, made her name sound like something precious. "I am going to ride back down to town, ask around, see what I can find out. Will you be all right here alone for a few hours?" Thea looked around the cabin, at the solid door with its heavy bar, at the rifle rack and the windows with their wooden shutters. "I will be fine. I know how to shoot," Zane nodded. "I figured. Your father was Will Crawford, right? He taught you." "You knew my father?" Thea asked, surprised. "Met him a few times back before he got sick. Good man. Honest. I was sorry to hear he passed." Thea felt the familiar ache in her chest that came whenever she thought of her father. "He was the best man I ever knew, and when he died, I learned real quick that most men are not like him." Zane was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "I am sorry you learned that lesson, but you are right to be cautious. World is full of people who will use you up and throw you away. Just want you to know that I am not one of them." "Everyone says that," Thea said, the words coming out sharper than she intended. "I know," Zane said. "And I am not going to argue with you or try to convince you. I am just going to prove it. Every single day I am around you, I am going to prove it. That is my promise to you, Thea Crawford. I will be the first person who actually keeps their word." Thea stared at him, something cracking open in her chest. No one had ever said anything like that to her before. No one had ever looked at her like she was worth the effort. "Why?" she whispered. "You do not even know me." Zane stepped closer, and Thea could feel the warmth radiating from him. "I know enough. I know you are brave enough to face down a killer instead of running. I know you are proud enough to choose danger over accepting help from someone you do not trust. I know you have been hurt, and you have every reason to keep your walls up. But I also know that you deserve better than what you have been getting. And I aim to show you that not all men are liars." He left before she could respond, swinging up onto his horse and riding down the trail without looking back. Thea stood in the doorway and watched until he disappeared into the trees, her heart beating too fast and her thoughts spinning. Nobody kept promises. That was the truth she had learned the hard way. But Zane Stockton looked at her like he meant every word he said, and despite everything she knew, despite all the ways she had been disappointed and betrayed, Thea found herself wanting to believe him. The afternoon passed slowly. Thea unpacked her few belongings, explored the cabin, and tried not to think about what it meant that she felt safer here, with a man she barely knew, than she had felt anywhere in the past 3 years. She found a sewing kit in one of the drawers and spent some time mending a tear in one of Zane's shirts that she found hanging on a peg. It was something to do with her hands, a way to repay his kindness in a small way. Zane returned as the sun was beginning to sink toward the mountains, carrying supplies from town. He had bread, fresh eggs, coffee, and a whole smoked ham. Thea's mouth watered at the sight of it. She had been living on thin soup and hard biscuits for months. "You did not have to buy all this," she said as he unpacked the saddlebags. "We have to eat," Zane said simply. "And I figured you might be hungry." He cooked dinner while Thea watched, feeling useless and strange. She was used to being the one who took care of things, who worked and scraped and made do. It was disorienting to have someone take care of her for a change. The ham was salty and rich, the eggs fresh and golden. Zane had fried them with wild onions he said he found growing near the creek. They ate at the small table, and Thea could not remember the last time she had felt this full. "I asked around town," Zane said as they were finishing. "Nobody knows anything, or if they do, they are not talking. But I found out something interesting. Your father's claim. Someone has been filing papers on it, trying to get it declared abandoned so they can take it over." Thea frowned. "But it is worthless. The vein played out years ago." "Maybe," Zane said. "Or maybe somebody knows something about that claim that you do not. Either way, I am going to ride out there tomorrow, take a look around. You should come with me. Safer than leaving you here alone." "Do you really think someone would try to kill me over a worthless hole in the ground?" Thea asked. Zane's eyes were serious. "I think people have been killed for less. And I think we need to figure out what is going on before someone tries again." That night, Thea lay in Zane's bed, wrapped in the Navajo blanket that smelled like him, and listened to him breathing on the floor across the room. It should have been awkward, but instead it was strangely comforting. She felt safe in a way she had not felt since her father died, and that terrified her almost as much as the bullets had. Because if she let herself feel safe, if she let herself trust, it would hurt that much more when Zane inevitably broke his promise like everyone else had. But as she drifted off to sleep, listening to the sound of wind in the pines and Zane's steady breathing, she thought that maybe, just maybe, it would be worth the risk. They rode out to the claim early the next morning, Thea again seated behind Zane on his horse. The claim was about 2 hours from the cabin, up a steep trail that wound through dense forest. Thea had not been there since her father died. It hurt too much, seeing the place where he had spent his last good years digging for gold that was never there. The claim looked abandoned just as she remembered it. The entrance to the mine was shored up with timbers that were starting to rot. Tools lay scattered about, rusting in the weather. But as they drew closer, Zane tensed. "Someone has been here," he said quietly. "Recently. See those tracks? Fresh, maybe a day old." Thea looked where he was pointing and saw the boot prints in the soft earth near the mine entrance. Her stomach twisted with unease. Zane dismounted and helped her down, then drew his gun. "Stay behind me," he said, his voice hard and focused in a way that reminded her he had been a scout, a tracker, someone who had faced danger as a way of life. They approached the mine entrance carefully. The timbers looked more solid up close than Thea remembered, and when Zane pushed aside the brush that had grown over the entrance, she saw that someone had reinforced them recently. "Thea," Zane said slowly, "when did your father stop working this claim?" 3 years ago, just before he died. He said the vein was played out, that there was no more gold. Zane pointed to the ground inside the entrance. In the beam of sunlight slanting through the opening, Thea could see fresh tailings, rock that had recently been dug out and sorted. Someone was working the mine. "Somebody has been mining here," Zane said. "And if they have been taking out gold, they probably do not want the rightful owner coming back to claim it." Anger flared in Thea's chest, hot and fierce. "My father died thinking he was a failure, thinking he had wasted years of his life on a worthless hole. If there was gold here all along and someone kept it from him, someone let him die believing he had failed." Her voice broke, and suddenly Zane was there, his hand warm on her shoulder. "We will find out who did this," he said, his voice gentle but steely underneath. "And we will make sure they answer for it. I promise you that." "You keep making promises," Thea said, looking up at him. They were standing so close she could see the darker ring around the amber of his eyes. "What if you cannot keep them?" "Then I will die trying," Zane said simply. "That is what a promise means to me, Thea. It is not just words. It is a piece of my soul I am giving you, and I do not give that away lightly." Something in Thea's chest felt like it was breaking open, like ice cracking in spring. She had spent 3 years building walls around her heart, and this man was dismantling them with nothing more than honesty and steady determination. "I do not know how to trust people anymore," she whispered. "I know," Zane said. "So I am not asking you to trust me. I am just asking you to let me prove myself, every single day, until you do not have a choice but to believe me." He stepped back, breaking the moment, and turned his attention back to the mine. "We need to find out who is behind this. Someone in town has to know. Someone is buying the gold, processing it, asking questions." They spent the next hour searching the area around the mine. Zane found more evidence of recent activity, including a campsite hidden in the trees about 100 yards away. Whoever was working the claim was being careful but not careful enough. There were tracks, signs, clues for someone who knew how to read them. 3 men, Zane said, studying the campsite. "Working in shifts, looks like. They are taking the gold out at night, probably to avoid being seen." "Can you track them?" Thea asked. Zane looked at her and something flickered across his face. "I can. But it will mean leaving you alone for a while, and I do not like that idea, not with someone trying to kill you." "So take me with you," Thea said immediately. "Thea, these men are dangerous. They have already tried to kill you once. And I would rather face them with you than hide in a cabin waiting to die," Thea said firmly. "I am not helpless, Zane. My father taught me to shoot, to ride, to survive out here. I am going with you." Zane looked like he wanted to argue, but something in Thea's expression must have convinced him. He nodded slowly. "All right, but you do what I say when I say it. No arguments. I am not going to let you get killed because you are too stubborn to follow orders." "I can live with that," Thea said. They followed the tracks east toward the higher mountains. The trail was faint, but Zane read it like a book, pointing out signs that Thea would have missed completely. A bent branch here, a disturbed rock there, the faint impression of a horseshoe in the dirt. They rode for hours, climbing higher and higher until the air grew thin and cold. As evening approached, Zane called a halt in a sheltered spot among the rocks. "We will camp here tonight," he said. "They are still half a day ahead of us, but we are gaining. We will catch up to them tomorrow." Thea helped him make camp, gathering wood while he tended to the horse. They built a small fire, keeping it low so the smoke would not give away their position. Zane cooked bacon and beans, and they ate in comfortable silence as the stars came out overhead. "Can I ask you something?" Thea said eventually, watching the firelight play across Zane's features. "Anything," Zane said. "Why did you save me? That first day when the shooting started, you did not know me. You could have just ducked for cover and let me take my chances. But you threw yourself in front of a bullet for a stranger." "Why?" Zane was quiet for a long time, staring into the fire. When he finally spoke, his voice was soft. "My sister was killed 3 years ago. Stray bullet from a bar fight. Wrong place, wrong time. I was not there to protect her. Ever since then, I have not been able to stand by and watch someone die when I could do something about it, especially not a woman, especially not someone who was clearly innocent." "I am sorry," Thea said quietly. "About your sister." "Her name was Elizabeth," Zane said. "She was 19 years old, and she wanted to be a teacher. She was good and kind and full of life, and she died because some drunk cowboy could not hold his liquor and had to prove he was a man." He looked at Thea, and his eyes were full of old pain. "So when I saw that shooter taking aim at you, I did not think. I just moved, because I could not save Elizabeth, but maybe I could save you." Thea felt tears sting her eyes. "I am not your sister, Zane. You do not owe me anything because of her." "I know," Zane said. "But maybe that is why I am so determined to keep my promises to you. Because I could not keep the promise I made to her, to always protect her. So now I am going to keep this one. I am going to prove to you that some men still know what honor means." Thea moved closer to him, drawn by something she could not name. "You are a good man, Zane Stockton. Better than most." "I am just a man, Thea. I have made mistakes, done things I am not proud of, but I am trying to be better, and having you around makes me want to try harder." They sat close together, shoulders touching, and watched the fire burn down. Thea felt something shifting inside her, walls coming down brick by brick. Zane had not asked for anything from her. He had not demanded gratitude or payment or favors. He had just kept his word, over and over, proving himself with actions instead of empty promises. That night they slept side by side, wrapped in blankets under the stars. Thea lay awake for a long time, listening to Zane breathe and thinking about trust, about faith, about the terrifying possibility of letting someone past her defenses. She had been alone for so long. But lying here beside Zane, she felt the weight of that loneliness for the first time, and she realized that maybe being alone was not the same thing as being safe. They woke before dawn and were back on the trail as the sun rose over the peaks. The tracks led them to an old trapper's cabin tucked into a narrow canyon. Smoke rose from the chimney, and 3 horses were tied to a rail outside. "That is them," Zane said quietly. They had dismounted and left the horse tied a half-mile back, approaching on foot. Now they crouched behind a boulder watching the cabin. "We need to be smart about this. They are not going to give up without a fight." "What do you want to do?" Thea asked. Zane thought for a moment. "I am going to circle around, come at them from the back. You stay here with the rifle. If anyone comes out that front door and it is not me, you shoot. Can you do that?" Thea checked the rifle he had given her, making sure it was loaded. "I can do that." Zane looked at her for a long moment, and Thea saw worry in his eyes. "Be careful, please." "You too," Thea said. Impulsively, she reached out and squeezed his hand. "Come back to me." Zane's fingers tightened around hers. "I will. That is a promise." Then he was gone, moving through the rocks like a shadow. Thea settled into position, the rifle resting on the boulder, her eyes fixed on the cabin door. Her heart was hammering, but her hands were steady. Her father had taught her well. 20 minutes passed. 30. Thea was beginning to worry when she heard shouting from inside the cabin. Then the back window shattered and a gunshot rang out. The front door burst open and 2 men stumbled out. guns drawn, looking confused and angry. Thea recognized one of them. Marcus Fletcher, who ran the assay office in Victor. He had offered to help her settle her father's estate, and she had turned him down because something about him made her skin crawl. Now she knew she had been right to trust her instincts. "Drop your guns," Thea called out, her voice carrying across the open ground. Both men spun toward her, and she saw Fletcher's face go pale when he realized who she was. "You," he snarled. "You should be dead." "Clearly your hired killer was not as good as you thought," Thea said. Her voice was steady, but inside she was shaking. "Now drop your guns before I shoot." Fletcher laughed, a harsh, ugly sound. "You do not have the nerve, little girl." He raised his gun, and Thea did not think. She just pulled the trigger. The rifle kicked against her shoulder, and Fletcher screamed, clutching his arm where the bullet had grazed him. His gun fell to the dirt. The second man dropped his weapon immediately, hands up. "Do not shoot. I am done." Zane appeared in the doorway behind them, a third man in front of him with a gun pressed to his back. "Nice shooting," he called to Thea. "My father taught me to aim for what I want to hit," Thea called back, surprising herself with how calm she sounded. They tied up the three men and searched the cabin. What they found made Thea's blood boil. There were ledgers showing 3 years of gold taken from her father's mine. Gold that should have been his. Gold that could have paid for doctors, for medicine, for a chance at a few more years of life. Fletcher had been working the mine in secret, filing false reports with the land office, telling her father his claim was worthless while he stole everything of value. "He let my father die believing he was a failure," Thea said, her voice shaking with rage. "He stole from him, lied to him, and then tried to kill me when he thought I might figure it out." Zane's hand was warm on her shoulder. "We got him, Thea. He is going to answer for what he did." They hauled the three men back to Victor, arriving after dark with their prisoners tied and subdued. Sheriff Morrison was shocked when they explained what they had found, and by morning half the town had heard the story. Fletcher and his accomplices were locked up, and the mine was officially returned to Thea's ownership. The assayer who examined the gold they had recovered estimated that Fletcher had stolen over $20,000 worth in the past 3 years. It was more money than Thea had ever imagined, more than enough to change her life completely. But as she stood in the sheriff's office, looking at the ledgers and the gold samples and the evidence of Fletcher's betrayal, all she could think about was her father. How he had died broken, believing he had failed. How Fletcher had stolen not just his gold but his dignity, his hope, his last few years of peace. "I want to see him," Thea said suddenly. "I want to see Fletcher." Morrison looked uncertain, but Zane nodded. "I will go with her." Fletcher was in the last cell, his arm bandaged where Thea's bullet had hit him. He looked up when they approached, and his lip curled in a sneer. "Come to gloat," he said. "No," Thea said quietly. "I came to tell you that my father was worth 100 of you. He was honest and hard-working and kind, and you were not fit to breathe the same air as him. You stole from him, you lied to him, and you let him die thinking he was worthless. But he was not. He was the best man I ever knew, and I am going to use the money you stole to do something good, something that would make him proud. You are going to spend the next 20 years in prison, and every day you are there, I want you to remember that you failed. You tried to destroy me like you destroyed my father, but I am still standing, and you are in a cage." She turned and walked out, and Zane followed her. They stood on the boardwalk outside the sheriff's office, and Thea realized she was crying. Not from sadness, but from a strange mix of grief and relief and righteous anger. Zane pulled her into his arms, and Thea went without hesitation, pressing her face into his chest and letting herself cry for the first time in 3 years. He held her, solid and warm and steady, his hand stroking her hair and his voice murmuring quiet comfort. "You did good," he said when her tears finally subsided. "Your father would be proud of you." "I wish he was here," Thea said, her voice muffled against Zane's shirt. "I wish he could see this." "He sees it," Zane said with certainty. "Wherever he is, he sees it, and he knows you are going to be all right." Thea pulled back to look at him, and something in Zane's expression made her breath catch. He was looking at her like she was the most important thing in the world, like she mattered more than anything, like she was worth keeping promises for. "You did it," she whispered. "You kept your word. You said you would prove it every day, and you did. You saved me, you protected me, you helped me get justice for my father. You kept every single promise you made." "I told you I would," Zane said simply, "and I am not done yet. I have a lot more days ahead of me to keep proving it." "Why?" Thea asked. "Why do you care so much?" Zane was quiet for a moment, his thumb brushing away a tear from her cheek. When he spoke, his voice was rough with emotion. "Because somewhere along the way, between that first gunshot and right now, I fell in love with you, Thea Crawford. I love your strength and your stubbornness, and the way you refuse to give up even when the world has beaten you down. I love how you loved your father, how you stood up to Fletcher, how you are trying so hard to trust again even though you are terrified. I love you, and I am going to keep proving it every single day for the rest of my life if you will let me." Thea stared at him, her heart feeling too big for her chest. Nobody had ever said anything like that to her before. Nobody had ever looked at her like Zane was looking at her now, like she was precious and powerful and worth fighting for. "I am scared," she whispered. "I am scared to believe you. I am scared to trust. I am scared that if I let myself love you back, something will happen and I will lose you like I lost everyone else." "I know," Zane said gently. "And I am not asking you to stop being scared. I am just asking you to let me stand beside you while you are scared. Let me prove that I am not going anywhere. Let me show you what it means when someone keeps their promises." Thea took a shaky breath. Then, before she could talk herself out of it, she stood on her toes and kissed him. It was soft and tentative, a question more than a statement. But Zane answered it by wrapping his arms around her and kissing her back with a tenderness that made her want to cry all over again. When they finally pulled apart, Thea was smiling. "I do not know if I can say I love you back yet, but I am falling, Zane, and I think you might just catch me." "I will," Zane promised. "Every single time." They spent the next few weeks working with the lawyers to sort out Thea's claim to the mine. It turned out that Fletcher had falsified documents, bribed officials, and committed enough fraud to ensure he would be spending a very long time behind bars. The mine was officially returned to Thea, along with all the gold that had been recovered from Fletcher's various hiding places. Thea hired a proper mining crew to evaluate the claim, and they confirmed what she had suspected. There was still gold in the mine, possibly years' worth if it was worked properly. She could hire miners, manage the operation, and make a real fortune. Or she could sell the claim outright and live comfortably for the rest of her life. In the end, she decided to do both. She sold a controlling interest to a reputable mining company out of Denver, keeping 20% for herself and enough control to ensure the miners were treated fairly. The sale brought in $15,000 immediately, with more to come as the mine produced. It was more money than Thea had ever dreamed of having. She could go anywhere, do anything. She could leave Victor and its painful memories behind, start fresh somewhere new. But when she thought about leaving, all she could think about was Zane. He had stayed by her side through all of it. He had helped her negotiate with the lawyers, advised her on the mining contracts, protected her when Fletcher's associates made threats. He had been steady and solid and true, proving himself with every single action. And Thea had fallen completely, irrevocably in love with him. It happened gradually, like dawn breaking over the mountains. One day she woke up in Zane's cabin, where she was still staying, and realized that the thought of him not being there made her chest ache. She loved the way he hummed while he cooked breakfast, loved how he always made sure she had the warmest blanket, loved the way he looked at her like she was the best thing that had ever happened to him. She loved him. And that terrified her and exhilarated her in equal measure. It was late October when she finally told him. They were at the cabin, sitting on the porch and watching the aspens turn gold in the evening light. The air had a sharp bite to it, a promise of winter coming. "I have been thinking about what to do with the money," Thea said, watching the play of light on the mountains. "Oh," Zane said. He was whittling a piece of wood, his hands moving with practiced ease. "I was thinking I could buy some land, build a proper house. Maybe start a business, a dress shop or a bakery, something of my own." "Sounds good," Zane said. His voice was carefully neutral, but Thea could hear the tension underneath. "You will do well at whatever you choose." "I was also thinking," Thea said, her heart beating fast, "that I would need someone to help me, someone I could trust, someone who keeps their promises." Zane's hands stilled on the wood. He looked at her, and Thea saw hope and fear and love in his amber eyes. "Thea," he said quietly. "I love you," Thea said, the words rushing out before she could stop them. "I fought it and I was scared and I did not want to trust you, but you just kept proving yourself over and over until I could not help it. You kept every single promise you made to me. You were the first, Zane. The first person to show me that not everyone breaks their word, and I love you for it. I love you for everything." Zane set down the wood and knife, then pulled Thea into his lap. She went willingly, wrapping her arms around his neck and burying her face in his shoulder. "I love you so much it scares me," Thea whispered. "What if something happens? What if I lose you?" "You will not," Zane said fiercely. "I am not going anywhere, Thea. I am going to be right here beside you every single day for the rest of our lives. That is my promise to you. And you know I keep my promises." Thea laughed through her tears. "You do. You really do." Zane tilted her face up and kissed her, slow and deep and full of promise. When they finally broke apart, he was smiling. "Marry me," he said. "Let me spend the rest of my life proving to you every single day that I love you, that I will always keep my word, that you are the most important thing in my world." "Yes," Thea said, not even having to think about it. "Yes, I will marry you." They were married 3 weeks later in the small church in Victor. It was a simple ceremony with Sheriff Morrison and Mrs. Kelly as witnesses. Thea wore a dress she had made herself from blue calico, and Zane wore his best suit, the one he had been saving for something special. When the Reverend asked Zane to make his vows, he took Thea's hands and looked into her eyes. "I promise to love you every single day for the rest of my life," he said. "I promise to be faithful, to be honest, to stand by your side through good times and bad. I promise to protect you, to cherish you, to prove myself to you with every breath I take. I promise that you will never have to doubt me, never have to wonder if I mean what I say. I am yours, Thea, from this day until my last. That is my vow, and I will keep it." Thea was crying as she made her own vows, promising to love him, to trust him, to build a life with him. When the Reverend pronounced them married, Zane kissed her like she was the most precious thing in the world, and Thea knew with absolute certainty that she had found her home. They spent their wedding night at the cabin, but in the weeks that followed, they began building a house of their own. Thea bought land just outside Victor, 20 acres with a creek running through it, and a view of the mountains that took her breath away every time she saw it. Zane designed the house, and they hired local carpenters to help build it. It had 4 bedrooms, a big kitchen with a cast iron stove, and a front porch that wrapped around two sides. There was a barn for horses and a workshop for Zane. Thea planted a garden and fruit trees, planning for a future that felt bright and full of possibility. They moved into the house in early spring, just as the wildflowers were starting to bloom. It felt like a new beginning, a fresh start for both of them. Thea opened her dress shop in Victor, and it quickly became popular. Women came from miles around for her careful stitching and eye for design. Zane took work as a guide, leading hunting parties and prospectors into the mountains. He was good at it, and it paid well. They were happy. It was as simple and as complicated as that. Thea woke up every morning next to the man she loved, and every day he proved his promises all over again. He brought her coffee in bed. He built shelves for her fabric. He listened when she talked about her day. He held her when the memories of her father became too painful. And slowly, carefully, Thea learned to trust completely. She learned that not everyone left, not everyone broke their promises, not everyone would hurt her. Zane was steady as the mountains, true as north, and he loved her with an intensity that still sometimes took her breath away. A year after they married, Thea discovered she was pregnant. She told Zane one evening in June, and he picked her up and spun her around, laughing with pure joy. "We are going to have a baby," he kept saying, like he could not quite believe it. "We are going to be a family." "We already are a family," Thea said, smiling at him. "But yes, we are going to have a baby. Are you ready to be a father, with you?" Zane said, pulling her close. "I am ready for anything." Their son was born in February of 1884, during a snowstorm that blanketed the valley in white. He was healthy and loud, with a strong set of lungs and his father's amber eyes. They named him William, after Thea's father, and Zane held him with a gentleness that made Thea fall in love with him all over again. "I promise," Zane whispered to the tiny baby in his arms, "to be the best father I can be. I promise to teach you to be honest, to be kind, to keep your word. I promise to love your mother and you with everything I have. That is my vow to you, William." Thea watched them together, her heart so full it felt like it might burst. This was what she had been afraid to hope for, this sense of belonging, of being loved, of being safe. Zane had given her all of that and more. He had kept his promise to prove himself every single day, and in doing so, he had taught her how to trust again, how to love again, how to believe in the goodness of people again. William grew into a happy, healthy boy. When he was 2, Thea had a daughter, Sarah, who had her mother's dark hair and her father's stubborn streak. 2 years after that came another son, James, who was quiet and thoughtful and loved to follow his father around the ranch they were building. The years passed in a blur of happiness. Thea's dress shop thrived, and she hired 2 seamstresses to help her keep up with demand. Zane expanded their land holdings, buying up surrounding properties until they had a working ranch with cattle and horses. They built a life together that was rich in all the ways that mattered. They had hard times too. There were droughts and harsh winters, sick animals and failed crops. There were arguments and misunderstandings, moments when Thea's old fears would resurface, and she would lash out, expecting Zane to leave to break his promises. But he never did. Every single time he proved himself again. He stayed through the arguments. He worked through the problems. He held her when she cried and reminded her that he was not going anywhere, that he had promised to stay, and he meant it. And every single time, Thea loved him more. When William turned 16, he asked his father how he had known his mother was the one for him. They were working in the barn, mending tack, and Zane was quiet for a long moment before answering. "Your mother had been hurt," he finally said. She had learned not to trust people because everyone in her life had broken their promises to her. She was scared and alone and trying so hard to be strong. And I saw all of that, and I knew that she deserved better. She deserved someone who would actually keep their word. So I promised her I would prove myself every single day, and I have been doing that for almost 20 years now. Does it ever get old? William asked. Proving yourself every day, Zane smiled. No, because every day I get to wake up next to the woman I love. Every day I get to see the life we built together. Every day I get to watch her smile and know that I helped put that smile there. That is not a burden, son. That is a privilege. William thought about that. I want to find someone like that someday, someone worth proving myself to. You will, Zane said. And when you do, remember this. Promises are not just words, they are commitments. They are pieces of your soul that you give to someone else. So do not make them unless you mean them. But when you do make them, keep them, no matter what. Because your word is all you really have in this world. Thea heard the conversation from where she was working in the garden, and it made her eyes sting with tears. After all these years, Zane was still teaching their children the same lessons he had taught her. Honesty. Integrity. The importance of keeping your word. That night, as they lay in bed with the windows open to let in the cool spring air, Thea turned to Zane. I heard you talking to William today, she said. About promises. Oh, Zane said, pulling her closer. You told him you have been proving yourself to me for 20 years, but you do not have to anymore, you know. I trust you completely. I know you will never break your word. Zane was quiet for a moment. Then he said, I know you trust me. But I am still going to prove myself every single day for the rest of my life. Not because you need me to, but because you deserve it. Because you are worth the effort. Because proving my love for you is the best part of my day, every single day. Thea kissed him, long and slow and full of all the love she felt. I am so glad that bullet missed, she whispered against his lips. I am so glad you were there that day. I am so glad you kept your promise. Me too, Zane said. Best decision I ever made was diving in front of that gun. Because it brought me you. They made love that night with the tenderness of long practice and deep affection, and afterward, Thea lay in Zane's arms and thought about how far she had come. From that scared, lonely woman who believed nobody kept promises, to this contented wife and mother who knew the true worth of a man's word, Zane had been the first. The first to keep his promises, the first to prove that not all men were liars, the first to show her what real love looked like. And he had kept proving it, every single day, just like he said he would. Their life continued in its peaceful rhythm. The children grew up strong and healthy. William went to college in Denver and came back with a degree in engineering. Sarah became a teacher, just like Zane's sister had wanted to be. James took over the ranch, marrying a sweet girl from town and filling the house with grandchildren. Thea and Zane grew old together, their hair turning silver, their hands developing the aches and pains of age. But their love never diminished. If anything, it grew stronger, deepened by decades of shared joy and sorrow, success and struggle. On their 40th wedding anniversary, their children threw them a party. The whole town came, filling their big house with laughter and music and love. Thea wore a dress she had made herself, still nimble with a needle even at 62. Zane wore his suit, the same one he had married her in, carefully preserved all these years. When it came time for toasts, William stood up, his own children clustered around him. My father once told me that promises are pieces of your soul that you give to someone else, William said. And I have watched him live that truth my entire life. He promised my mother he would prove himself to her every single day, and he has. I have never once seen him break his word. I have never once seen him fail to put her first. He has been the example I have tried to follow, the standard I have tried to meet. So I want to toast my parents who showed me what real love looks like, what real commitment looks like, what it means to keep your promises every single day for a lifetime. Everyone raised their glasses, and Thea felt tears running down her cheeks. Zane squeezed her hand and she looked at him, this man who had saved her life in more ways than one. "I love you," she said, loud enough for everyone to hear. "You kept your promise, Zane Stockton. Every single day for 40 years you proved yourself. You were the first person to show me that promises meant something. And because of you, I learned to trust again, to love again, to believe in goodness again. You gave me everything." "You gave me everything too," Zane said, his voice rough with emotion. "You gave me purpose, gave me a family, gave me a reason to be the best man I could be. You made me want to keep my promises. And I am going to keep proving myself to you for as long as I have breath in my body." They kissed to the applause of their family and friends, and Thea thought about that scared young woman standing in the street of Victor, refusing to trust the stranger who had saved her life. She thought about all the years since, all the moments big and small where Zane had proven his love. The way he brought her coffee every morning, the way he held her when she was sad, the way he listened to her dreams and helped her achieve them, the way he loved their children and taught them to be good people. Every single day he had kept his promise. And in doing so, he had given her the greatest gift she could have imagined, a life full of love and trust and unshakable faith in another human being. They lived another 10 years after that anniversary. 10 years of grandchildren and great-grandchildren, of watching their family grow and thrive. 10 years of sitting on their porch and watching the sun set over the mountains they both loved. 10 years of proving, over and over, that some promises are meant to be kept forever. Zane died first, peacefully in his sleep on a cool autumn morning. He was 78 years old and he had lived a good life. Thea held his hand as he took his last breath, and the last thing he said to her was, "I kept my promise. Every single day, I love you." "I love you too," Thea whispered. "Thank you for keeping your word. Thank you for proving it. Thank you for being the first." She lived 2 more years without him, surrounded by her children and grandchildren. She kept the dress shop open until she was too frail to work anymore. She stayed in the house they had built together, tending her garden and remembering. On the anniversary of the day Zane had saved her life, 50 years to the day after that first gunshot, Thea sat on her porch and thought about how much her life had changed because of one man's promise. She had been so sure that nobody kept their word, but Zane had shown her different. He had proven himself every single day, and in doing so, he had changed not just her life, but the lives of everyone they touched. Their children kept promises. Their grandchildren learned integrity. The legacy Zane and Thea had built was not just in land or money, but in the values they had passed down: honesty, faithfulness, the importance of keeping your word. That night, Thea died in her sleep, dreaming of a young cowboy with amber eyes who had thrown himself in front of a bullet for a stranger. She dreamed of promises kept and love proven and a life well lived. And when morning came and her daughter found her peaceful in her bed, there was a smile on her face. The whole town came to her funeral. People who had bought dresses from her shop, families who had been touched by her kindness, men and women who had known her and Zane and been inspired by their love. They buried her next to Zane, under the aspens they had both loved, with a headstone that read simply, "Thea Crawford Stockton." She learned to trust again, and on Zane's headstone, "Zane Stockton," he kept his promises every single day. Their story became legend in Victor, passed down through generations. The tale of the woman who believed nobody kept promises, and the cowboy who proved her wrong, one day at a time, for 50 years. Young couples would visit their graves and promise each other the same thing to prove their love every single day, to keep their word no matter what, to build something lasting and true. Because that was what Zane and Thea had shown them. That love was not just a feeling. It was a choice, made over and over, day after day. It was promises kept and faith rewarded and trust earned through consistent action. It was waking up every morning and deciding to prove yourself all over again, not because you had to, but because the person you loved deserved nothing less. That was the legacy they left behind. Not wealth or fame, but the simple, powerful truth that some people really do keep their promises. And when you find someone like that, when you find someone willing to prove themselves every single day, you hold on tight and never let go. Because people like that are rare. People like Zane Stockton, who look at a broken, scared woman and see someone worth saving. Who make a promise and keep it for 50 years. Who prove, day after day after day, that love is real and trust is possible and some promises really are forever. Thea Crawford had said nobody kept promises. Zane Stockton had said he would be the first and he would prove it every single day. And he had. For 50 years, through joy and sorrow, success and struggle, he had kept his word. He had been the first. And because of him, Thea had learned to believe again, to trust again, to love again, and that, in the end, was the greatest promise of all.